World leaders are meeting for a special summit on climate change on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. But there's a twist. The only ones allowed to speak are those who bring new and meaningful action to the table. That's on orders from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. He's convening the Climate Ambition Summit that aims to highlight trailblazers and prod polluters into reducing emissions. The UN isn't saying yet who can speak. But one success story is Brazil, where logging in the Amazon has fallen dramatically. President Lula da Silva has strengthened the agency monitoring deforestation and rolled back some of his predecessors' anti-environmental policies. DW has been following the officers tasked with protecting the rainforest.
The Amazon rainforest here has all but disappeared. In Brazil's northeastern state of Maranhão, 72% of the forest has been razed down. And it is up to these environmental officers to protect what's left.
The important thing is to try and stop unauthorized deforestation and the invasion of protected areas, such as indigenous territories and conservation units. But this is only possible with our constant presence here. Every month, the inspectors must take turns to try and ensure that deforestation is decreasing.
The officers from Brazil's environmental protection agency, IBAMA, rely on satellite information to choose what locations they will inspect. Once they get there, they face many hurdles. In this area, 73 hectares of trees have been cut down. The challenge, finding out who is behind this destruction and holding them accountable.
Especially in areas where there are primary forests, in areas of illegal mining or within indigenous territories. There tends to be more conflict there.
The officers collect more information by talking to local residents. Following these leads, they locate a trader who may be the owner of the land just inspected. He denies the evidence shown in the images. But if he is proven to be responsible, he will have to pay a fine. On their tour, the inspectors also find freshly felled trees. Here in the Araribóia indigenous territory live the Guajajara people, and also isolated peoples like the Awa, who depend on nature to survive.
We want more protection, and we want the world to learn from us. We can change the world by protecting the rainforest. That helps maintain the balance in the face of climate change.
In this case, the officers came just in time to scare away the illegal timber thief. The person sawing down the trees heard the inspectors' cars approaching and fled. He left behind a motorcycle, which will be seized. And just like this, cracking down on illegal activities step by step, IBAMA's environmental officers hope to protect the Amazon's biodiversity.
More on the story with Louise Osborne from DW Environment. So Brazil's finally combating deforestation. What else is it doing to protect the Amazon?
That's right. I mean, under the last president, these policies were put in place, which basically gave free rein to economically exploit the Amazon with regards to cutting down trees and burning areas. The new president who came in January, Lula da Silva, has been rolling back those policies, giving a lot more money to the enforcement agencies, as we just saw in the report, and also stepping up monitoring, giving areas also back to indigenous communities who have been shown to be able to look after these areas more effectively, and trying to show farmers how they can sustainably use the land without pulling down the trees. And it's made a huge difference. Around 66%, deforestation is down by around 66% on figures before. So it's had a positive effect.
And just explain to our viewers again, how important is the Amazon? It's considered a lung of the world, isn't it?
Exactly. So, I mean, obviously it's important to Brazil itself, but it's of global significance because it's so important when it comes to absorbing carbon dioxide. Now, that's really important in terms of combating climate change and trying to hold back or reverse some of the changes that we're seeing, like the extreme weather, the heat waves that are happening in Brazil's winter, for example, the wildfires or the conditions leading to wildfires in Australia and other countries. So the Amazon is essential in doing that. And in seeing these areas of deforestation or being burned down. We've actually seen areas of the Amazon that are emitting more carbon than they are absorbing. And that's a massive problem because we need it to take away the carbon dioxide, as I was just explaining.
What's different this time about this so-called Climate Ambition Summit?
So this summit obviously is giving a forum to countries to announce what they want to do to make concrete action. And, you know, some of the big players are not being able to speak at the conference. The US and China will not be allowed to speak, for example. And they are the biggest emitters in the world. So it's...
Is that a good thing?
It's a good question. I mean, they have no concrete action, obviously, that they are making, according to the UN anyway. And so maybe that is the reason that they're not allowed to speak. It also will give them time, though, to think for the global climate summit that is coming up at the end of the year and how they can make steps forward then. People will be demanding that because of the effects that we're seeing and the changes that obviously need to be done to bring down the carbon emissions that we as humanity are making.
So it's all about putting on our thinking caps and coming up with some new ideas for a problem that hasn't been solved for a long time. Louise Osborne, thank you very much for coming in today.
Now, Laura Kehoe is an environmental scientist and activist and founder of EUBrazilTrade.org. That's a global coalition of scientists and indigenous groups calling for stricter EU trade with Brazil. Welcome to DW. Do you expect today's Climate Ambition Summit to achieve anything?
Well, normally when I'd watch a Climate Ambition Summit, I wouldn't have much hope, but Lula changes things for me. There's been a huge sea change since he was elected. We've seen deforestation go down. He seems to mean what he says. He's also talking a lot about inequality, about supporting human rights, about supporting Indigenous people. So all in all, I think there is hope again for the Amazon.
Hope, maybe, but Lula's is just one voice among 34, I think, that have been invited to speak at this summit. And two of the countries not invited to speak are the two biggest polluters, the United States and China. What can you achieve in terms of environmental protection without the contributions from the two biggest polluters on the planet?
Well, this is a funny thing that comes up a lot. I'm Irish, so often you get in Ireland, oh, we're such a small country, we can't make a difference. And all of the blame and all of the energy is put towards these bigger polluters. But I think with this crisis, we need to realise that even a small country like Ireland can be a beacon of light if we do things right. And I think that's what Brazil is hopefully becoming once more with deforestation going down. We can see that with good leadership, with very strong Indigenous activism, with a lot of civil disobedience and action, we can transform things. And Lula and the incoming government shows that quite well.
They show that you can transform things in those government jurisdictions. But if our concern is for the world's environment, you still get nowhere and make very little difference without the contributions from the US and China.
So in terms of the environment, I remember walking along a beach a few years back and there was rubbish everywhere. And I had that feeling of what's the point? There's so much. There is just so much to do, so much wrong. And I realized by picking up this one plastic bag, one turtle might not eat that and die. Does that matter? Does that fix the world? Does it save everything? No. Is it still important to that one turtle? Absolutely. And I think that's the attitude we need to have, because doomism and denial and defeatism is very, very common today. And if we all fall under that spell, then we are doomed. But if we realise the power that each of us hold, then we still do have a way forward.
Your organisation, EUBrazilTrade.org, just draw us a line between the EU and Brazil doing trade and the environment.
Absolutely, yeah. So the EU is Brazil's second largest trade partner. And I set up this campaign when Bolsonaro was president and the EU was negotiating quite heavily to pass the EU-Mercosur trade deal, which would have locked in business with Brazil for a very long time. And if we lock in business with a country that's intent on destroying their natural habitat, then what we're doing is we're funding that destruction. So the whole point of the campaign was echoing Sonia Guajajara's call, who is currently now the first Indigenous minister, she's the Minister of Indigenous Peoples, to ask that the EU make trade sustainable, that we put the environment first, that we no longer have deforestation for dinner, essentially.
Thanks for joining us, Laura Kehoe from EUBrasilTrade.org.
Thank you very much for having me.
Meanwhile, Britain's Prime Minister has announced plans to weaken some of his country's environmental commitments. Following an emergency cabinet meeting, Rishi Sunak said Britain will delay some of its key climate targets, such as bans on new petrol cars, and he said the UK would pivot to what he called more sensible green leadership. He also claimed the infrastructure wasn't in place to meet former pledges. Now, this move comes amid growing concern over the potential financial cost of the campaign to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Here's more of what the Prime Minister had to say.
We're investing billions in new energy projects, yet we don't have the grid infrastructure to bring that power to households and businesses. And when energy security is national security, that's unacceptable.
Let's get more from Charlotte Chelsom-Pill, who's in London. Welcome, Charlotte. What else did we just hear? What else did we hear from the Prime Minister?
Well, the Prime Minister said very clearly this isn't about reneging on the commitments that the UK has made on its climate policies. That includes, very importantly, its commitment to reach its net zero target by 2050. Instead, he said this is about adjusting the path to get there. So he announced a series of measures which essentially watered down plans that were already in place to reach this net zero target. Among them, for example, he's delaying plans to replace petrol and diesel vehicles with electric cars. When it comes to people's homes, he's also delaying plans to replace boilers with more environmentally friendly heat pumps. He also announced an incentive to help people to do that. His main point here was that this is about, he said, changing the way that politics is done. He said that there's been too much short-term thinking, too many slogans promising these commitments, and this has not been properly talked through with the British public. They don't understand or appreciate the cost that it will come at. It's coming at a bad time for people. He said this is going to be a more democratic debate going forward. He said if you don't take the British public by the hand on introducing these policies, then this climate goal, net zero climate goal, won't be reached at all.
So if this is true, that his way of doing things is a more democratic way of doing things, why is this policy shift so controversial?
More democratic, more pragmatic, he said. But yes, as you say, this is extremely controversial. It's quite rare that you see the auto industry and the environmentalists united in their criticism, but that has been the case today as it's unfolded just how these environmental policies will be watered down. A lot of people saying that any watering down of environmental policies will ultimately be more expensive. They say this is not good for the environment, this is not good for the economy. Business leaders as well saying that this is shaken confidence, also not good for the economy either. So there's been a lot of criticism from within the Prime Minister's own party as well, many saying that this is the biggest mistake of his career and perhaps not as politically expedient as perhaps he might hope.
And talk us through the timing of this announcement.
Well, Rishi has said that this is in line with the philosophy that he's had for a while, but I think a lot of cynics would look to the fact that there's expected to be an election next year. Now, I'm just going to talk you through a local government result. You might think it's just local politics, but it is thought to be key to this. The Conservative Party, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's party, they won a surprise election win in a local election on the grounds of being against a policy for putting a fee or a toll on the most polluting cars. That apparently has really shaped political thinking, policy. They think that that can set them apart from the opposition party, which is currently leading in the polls. So some suggestion here that there is a lot of politics involved. But if you look at polls, if you look at how the public view these net zero climate goals, they are very popular. So it does remain to be seen whether or not this is the election winner he might hope it is.
Thank you for that, Charlotte Chelsom-Pill in London.